So we could break music down into four different categories. We have rhythm, right? We have harmony, we have melody, and then you could say tonality would be a part of it. Okay, so I think the most essential spot to start with is rhythm, because you don't have music without rhythm to begin with. It's like a rudimentary thing. And so the core way we relate to rhythm is our own heartbeat, right? So everybody understands, like, that's a beat used very often in music, the heartbeat, right? And that sound. So what's really interesting when you get into rhythm is that there's the fastest category is in classical music. The little sign you'll see is presto. There might be even like a prestissimo. I don't know. I don't know all the words, but presto is like really fast, like 180 beats to 200 beats a minute. And enjoyable music and music that can be sustained at that tempo for a long period of time generally tops out around that range. Now, people have written stuff faster and you can hear subdivisions faster. It's very hard to find a popular song ever above a certain tempo. And so that's, oddly enough, it's related to like a really maximal, like sustainable heartbeat. Like an Olympic athlete at max push is going to be around that beats per minute in their own heart. And so you have the other side of things is that there's actual point where our brain stops recognizing something as rhythm or tempo any longer. And that is below 33 beats a minute, which is weird. I have this experience, and some people describe this. If you have where you can control tempo in a song, or like, through MIDI, and you start to slow that song down to 33 beats a minute, I feel like I'm dying. I literally feel like my heart stopped. It's gross. It's gross. I can't do it. I literally can't do it. So so when you get into this whole world of phenomenological experience, we have to understand when we start to engage music is that music is something that happens over time, right? The tempo, the base category to generate that time, is absolutely instantiated in our own body as far as what we find acceptable or not. So our own heartbeat determines how we feel about the music and what it would be like to embody that tempo. Are you tracking with me on that?
I'm tracking.
Okay, great. All right, so this category is called rhythm. So if things get too fast, actually, so if I start to play notes too fast, it gets to the point where you won't, or the rhythm gets too fast, then you won't actually hear rhythm anymore. You'll actually hear a note starts to form. So when you get above 20 attacks a minute, so you hit a snare drum and it's more than 20 attacks a second, you'll start to hear a really low note emerge. And so when you get out of the realm of rhythm, you start to get into tonality. It starts to make sense when you think your life has a tempo. Everything has a tempo. The ocean has a tempo, right? The ocean is moving in waves. Everything flows in the world. A desert, if you think about a desert, which is the slowest tempo in the world, it has the same shapes. It has dunes. It has waves, right? It's still flowing. It's just too slow for you to see anymore. If you put a time-lapse video on a desert over 3 years and you sped it up, those dunes are not in the same spot. It's moving just like an ocean. Those are waves.
Yes.
And so all of these music is presenting to us all the time, and in a measurable microcosm, what's actually going on in the entire world. So when you see the tempo of life sped up, you see that reflected in melody and rhythmic choices, that actually music has become far more rhythmically oriented as the world starts to move at a consistent and faster tempo. So that's rhythm. You have any questions on that before I move on to the next one?
Yeah, that was pretty good for point 1 of 4. Okay, so what you're doing is you're beginning to show how music is not just something that you could like listen to on iTunes. You're beginning to see its qualities throughout the cosmos. And your example so far has been rhythm.
Everything, the way a snake crosses the ground, the way the ocean flows, what it's like to be on top of a mountain. I think all those things are they're a presentation of something beyond that we could see with our own 5 senses, and that they're there to teach us things. So music, it's like we walk around, we don't ever think about, why are we a thing that sings? Like, it's a question you should ask. It's super meaningful if you can start to figure out even like the tiniest bit of that, what's underneath that onion skin. And why do we make music? Like, what do these things mean? Like, not just, oh, it's fun, But we get into that side of music that it's like, no, we're being presented something, and we were given a vocabulary to communicate things that are way too big to come up with a word for. Mm-hmm. And there's narrative structure to that. So like the second aspect of this that I was talking about was harmony. When you get into harmony, we're starting to talk about the conditions to allow things to exist. Another way to think of harmony, it's your scene. So if you go watch a movie and the movie's shot in New York City is such a big location that has so much history for most people that it's almost a character unto itself, right? So when you see that, there's a certain way you expect people to talk and behave, and you understand that whole entire environment, okay? So that's something like harmony. So the weird thing about harmony is the way its identity emerges and what it does to our identity. So the easiest way to understand music, if you've seen The Sound of Music, the movie with Julie Andrews, and
the hills are alive with the sound of music.
Exactly. They have that song that explores just a simple major scale. It's that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Mm-hmm. Right? So what's crazy is, let's just say that's the key of C major, okay? So it goes from a C to a C. There are 8 different names in that, with the C repeating twice. So it goes C, D, E, F, G, and it starts back over. When you get to G, I don't know why they did this. I guess it makes sense, but it goes back to A, and then B and C. So that's a C major scale. If I start to play a song in that key, whether you know anything about music, your brain already knows the key. Like, it's the sense where if I suddenly depart from that key and that tonal center, which is C, your brain's like, where are we now? We've gone somewhere new, right? Something's changed. A scene change has happened. So what's interesting is I take those same notes, and like C major would be considered generally an upbeat key, right? A happy key. Major keys generally, in a real boring sense, I could say major keys are glad or happy. Well, minor keys have a little more contemplativeness or a little sad, if we want to go with like a little kid vocabulary version of that. And so with the same notes, by how I arrange them and their relationship to each other, I can imply not C major anymore, but A minor. In music, that's called relative minor. So what's so interesting, I'm playing all the same notes, but by setting up their relationships within the harmony, your brain will shift and be like, oh, this is that sadder version, and this note is the center. This lower note is the center, or higher note, depending on where you're at in the scale.
We have a lot of beautiful valley oak trees here. They're towering trees, tons of shade. They have like chandelier type of branches. It's one of my favorite trees.
Yeah.
But if I were to go into that forest and I were to pick out and say, like, look at those leaves, right? So it's all composed of the same components, you could say. Mm-hmm. But then it like organizes, and just like I said, I described it as a chandelier, right? So then all of a sudden, right, it's starting to draw all of these other details of meaning towards that center of what I'm pointing to. But if I were to point to the trunk and the roots, I would think of, water and nutrition and soil ecology, right?
Right.
Same scene, yep. Standing in the same place, looking at the same tree, but where I direct my attention, or that tonal center, harmonizes the rest of the components of meaning.
Yeah, I watched your video on soil. That was pretty neat.
With Steve.
I never heard much of that before. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff.
One of the things we're not conscious of, especially now because people don't really play with keys and tonal centers like they used to in classical music, is that it's a total presentation of how identities are formed. It's things in relationship to each other is what an identity is. So again, the only relationship I have when I hear your name is Derek, and other names of Derek and other spellings of Derek, or maybe the etymology of that name, but the etymology of that name doesn't necessarily tell me anything about you as an identity. Now, as soon as I interact with you and I hear about the state you're from, now you're Derek in that state, right? So that's, there's more setting to this, right? Now you would be the melody still. Let's just call you the melody. But harmony is all the stuff that surrounds you that gives you context. So you got you have your hair's in a ponytail,
man,
right? It's like, okay, this guy might have liked a little bit more rock music at some point in his life. Mm-hmm. I can start to make assumptions about that, or so on and so forth. And I'm like, well, okay, Derek's wife probably doesn't hate the fact that he doesn't shave, and so I can start to pick up details about you, and you start to become, your identity emerges. And so harmony does that same thing to music, is that it can create an environment and location. So harmony is the room you're in. Harmony is the vibe of the restaurant you went to. That's like, Pan-Asian with cool, cool lighting and vibey booths. And it's all of this part of it gives you the meaning to the story, because now how someone behaves in that environment. If the environment I painted for you is a nice restaurant, and melodically the character I introduce is a bull in a china shop, it's going to mean something different than if you saw a bull at a farm. So harmony does this thing, and also now that does that for us. It's that setting, but also it gives us an idea of where the tonal center is, and the tonal center allows me now to present questions and answers, just like you would in any story. Any plot line is a series of, like, you have a fact, and then you have a question about those facts or what's coming next, and then you have an answer. That's how plots move along, and music is identical thing. And the best way to understand harmony is that it gives you the context for things in which to have meaning and identity. So with harmony too, you also have that expectation. Like if I'm playing a C chord and I go to an F or a G, one of the possibilities that will branch into in your mind, you're going to expect to go back to C, right? So, I mean, you don't really have to understand music to understand this, in the sense that if I went, you have that, you're already hearing it before I did it, right? So like, Roger, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a good example of that. But that's one of the things as a composer you're trying to do, is that you have to figure out when it's the right time to satisfy that expectation strongly, or sort of satisfy that expectation, or to subvert that expectation. So that's part of the role that harmony has.
We're 2 down, 2 to go. Okay. So far rhythm, so far harmony. What would be number 3?
All right. Well, I'm gonna take a little branch off on tonality, because melody is all of these things combined. So tonality is you alluded to this earlier about like what kind of thing is my vocal cord, right? So when you get into tonality, you actually overlap into technology, meaning the tool that you use to make music, right? Now, what's interesting, like every piece of technology, you could argue that is an extension of things that people already do, right? So we travel and we learn to travel faster. We cook and we learn to cook faster. Like the dishwashers, like people could wash dishes, now they wash them faster. Even your own voice, you can change and reshape it to make different sounds. I mean, all you have to do is Google like beatbox competitions, like, the winner from 2019, the guy just absolutely will blow your mind. All the sounds he can make. And you realize that all these things are an extension that we already do with our voice. The instrumental tonality tells us a lot of things. So, I mean, generally, he talks about this in language creation in that same, the chapter where he talks about musical instruments. If you guys had the book, you can read it again, and it'll probably bring some insight to this. It's chapter 42, page 155. And he gives a couple of small examples. I could elaborate on that more, but just how the harp, right? The harp, when you think of the harp, you think of that contemplative relaxation. It's very hard to have an aggressive song on the harp. It's not really the right instrument. Although now that I said that, I'm sure I could Google.
Sounds like you just created harp. Your own challenge right there.
Right.
Not going to make the harp hardcore.
I mean, really. And then when you think of, like, he gives this example in the book of a brass instrument, it's like more of an alert, an alarm, or resurrection, like something, if you're going to have that sound of something coming back to life out of the ground, it might be a brass instrument might come to mind. In the book, let's go to Revelations again. They announce different things about to happen. The brass is like how they used to announce that. And it's a very old instrument from just back in the day when they used to hollow out horns and blow through horns. So that would be blowing as an instrument. You have like stringed instruments, right? And these are, that's actually the technical thing that happens when you're playing a violin. I play cello. Is you're scraping. You put rosin on the strings, right? And by scraping the bow along it, it grabs that rosin and pulls and does like super hyper fast plucking and grabbing. And that's the scraping instrument. And that has its own tonality. So if I play a melody on any of these 3 instruments, you're going to have a different impression of who's saying it. It's like if I take a mobster character like Tony Soprano and I have him give you the speech from Hamlet, to be or not to be, you're going to have a different impression than if Gilbert Gottfried, the voice of Iago, the parrot, squawk through it. And you're going to have a different impression if Gizmo the Gremlin from that movie, like Howie Mandel did that voice, you're going to have a totally different impression from it's the same content. It's going to be a different joke to have one of these people deliver it, right? Versus like a genuine Shakespearean actor where like, oh, that's where that content fits. So the tonality of the instrument says a lot about what that environment, what we're supposed to think of that environment. And again, you have all these things that cooperate with that expectation. So if something's more tranquil, you have things you can add to that will complement it. Like if you're at a certain restaurant and it's like, okay, I have pasta, like chicken parm goes with that. Mm-hmm. If you're at an Asian restaurant and, suddenly someone gives you chicken parm, it doesn't fit there, right? But at the same time, there's always opportunity in the irony as well. So, I mean, then you have some weird restaurants that will just combine everything and make it work. So tonality it tells us a lot about, it's the same thing that could be akin to like your accent in life. Well, a melody is one of these ones, like when you think about everything I just said, it uses all those components. So a melody by itself, you can sing Amazing Grace right now or the Star Spangled Banner. Mm-hmm. And you'll hear the chords in your head. You won't know it, but if I went and told you this is the key of the song and played it on the piano, you would know if that answer I gave was right or wrong. Everyone would, right? If I hit the wrong note, they would know it immediately. You have to come up with something that's satisfying, like a good story. It's satisfying the first time you hear it and when you didn't know what was going to happen next. And it's also satisfying when you know what's going to happen next. Mm-hmm. So, melody basically, everything else you did set up a character, and now you have a character in that story. So all the music sets up the context, the tempo, the emotional pacing, and now that gives you the opportunity to actually have a story. You don't have a story without other objects and things to interact with, but also objects and things to interact with. It's just a setting without the melody. That melody is asking a question. Every note that melody hits until the end of the phrase, there's a question in your ear, and your ear has expectations of what that answer might be, mm-hmm. right? So that's the same with every movie you watch, every character arc in every story you watch. It's constantly, what are they going to do next? Or, for an example, you might watch a show that has a character that, like Michael Scott on The Office. Let's get to a more comedic one. We know that he's going to respond probably in the most awkward way that's genuine to what his character is and what his character thinks, right? Mm-hmm. So because we have this universe and we have this setting, now you have Michael Scott, which is the melody, right? And when something happens, we have an idea of what he's about to do. Now, so the cleverness of the writers is that he has to do something that when he does it, we know that's what he would do, right? But at the same time, we necessarily didn't see it coming and we're still surprised by it. So that's kind of what good melody is in general, is that you've established a character. When it does the next thing, you're like, of course that character would do that. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, it has to not be exactly what you would have predicted, because then you're bored. Yeah.
But I also think about melody too, like let's use your album, for example, Thunderbird. So Thunderbird, when I listen to it, it's like 100 people singing at the same time with all these different harmonies, right? People singing with different notes at different scales, different parts along the keyboard, you could say. They're all in union. They're all communing together to say a message as one voice. And I think that song is so heavy on melody because I think the first half of it is practically a cappella. And so it's really leaning on the chorus of melody, not just like a little hook of like 4 words, but actually like all of these voices singing out this narrative.
Right. So you can get away with that if you know or you remember how to write melodies that imply the chord structure. Not every melody implies a chord structure. Like people will, what happens most of the time in modern music is that you'll have a repetitive melody where the chords change underneath to give that repetitive melody new context. Uh-huh. So, I mean, I can get away with that because, and I got another song coming out that does something similar to that in the final thing, but I try to do that in all the songs. Like, I don't really feel like I have a song unless I can put all the instruments down and just sing it and it means something, right? So that's old school, man. That's like old hymns, you know. Like if you when you go to church and you sing an old hymn, man, like the guy can stop playing the piano, and the band can stop playing, and the song still works. But if you sing like a modern, church song, I don't just it's not going to happen. You need that guy strumming the guitar to make sense out of it most of the time. So with that song, you can do that. So yeah, there's that idea of like there's harmony, like there's melody, there's harmony, and there's also like the idea that things are euphonious, right? That it's a crowd has come together, and it's in a civilization, if you will, like that. Something being euphonious is like a civilization coming together and everything playing its part.